Back in my day, remakes were reserved for games that had aged poorly, which mostly meant PlayStation and N64 titles. 3D hardware just wasn't there yet, and that generation was especially marred by bad frame rates and low poly counts, so it's no surprise that remakes have been mostly focused on that period. But we're running out of early 3D classics to update, so developers are turning to newer and less dated games to keep the nostalgia train going, some of which were already HD. It's not a bad thing on the face of it, but it does make for less exciting upgrades, and the risk of screwing up something that wasn't broken goes much higher. Resident Evil 4 was a lightning-in-a-bottle type of game that found a pitch-perfect balance between horror, action, and cartoon silliness that Capcom was never able to recapture in the sequels, and it still holds up very well. I'm using the HD mod in all my footage, but even the old graphics have more atmosphere than some new games do. It's a tall order to build something from scratch that can top all of that, is the point, and there wasn't a pressing need to try. In spite of that, Capcom mostly did a great job and surprised me with how much closer it hews to the first remake than the last few they've done. This isn't a reimagining or a watered-down version of RE4. Most of the iconic sequences are here and in many cases are just one-to-one recreations with modern standards. It's often faithful right down to the item locations. Events happen in different orders, or some set pieces get merged together, or some rooms are explored backwards compared to before, but the majority of content survives in some form. There was fear that Capcom would cut the goofiest parts of the game, and that has happened. The machine gun turret inside the castle, the claw machine in the factory, the bulldozer sequence, and the U3 boss are just a few of the losses. But unlike Resident Evil 3, they tend to replace cut content with something similar enough to fill the void, so you're not left missing much. The machine gun nest was traded for a new stealth challenge. Leon is now susceptible to mind control and will get disoriented by the lead cultist, so while all-out action is still an option, it's better to sneak through undetected and take them by surprise. It's not the same thing, but it works, and in hindsight I question how fun it was to shoot through the weird hitboxes on the old turret anyway. The stealth is never forced, but its inclusion makes the gameplay more dynamic, and it allows for interesting new options and sequences you could probably play blindfolded by now. It feels like content has expanded more often than it's cut. The lake is now filled with destinations and inlets to explore, compared to the 3 docks in the original. Instead of one medallion hunt at the start, the merchant now offers side missions throughout the entire game, which squeezes a lot of extra use out of finished areas. In hindsight, it does seem like a waste for the original to have only used this idea once. The target range is now a much fuller minigame that actually provides useful practice for each type of weapon. Some of the options just didn't work in the old game, but here the trials are specifically tailored for each gun. Or every gun, in this case. Not only did the minecart ride make it in, but it was expanded into 2 sections. In a lot of cases, the changes aren't as much about how you play as much as who you play with. Otherwise familiar sequences take on a different mood with a partner to worry about, or to provide backup, and generally I liked what these changes brought. Slight adjustments to the level design can have large impacts. You could breeze right past the village and straight to the farm after the church escape, but now the game forces you to engage with the whole area before moving on. The island was the most likely place for cuts, but it remains surprisingly intact, which could be a good or bad thing depending on how much you liked it. The dissection lab is bigger and has new obstacles to prevent you from escaping easily, intensifying what was already the creepiest part of the game. 4 was never particularly scary, but the horror has been boosted whenever possible, similar to how the remake of 2 changed that game. There's also some disturbing new side content, shedding more light on how the cultists operate. Capcom had good judgment about what to expand and what to keep the same, and it's in that regard that this reminds me of the first remake. Unfortunately, it can't always keep that level of quality up, and some of the most iconic sequences take the biggest hits. People mainly wanted a remake to fix the stiff controls, and now you have moving while aiming and much more. Leon feels far better to control than in the original. To compensate for that, they made the villagers annoyingly grabby and less responsive to bullets. It usually takes 2 headshots to stun an enemy now, and they lack the extremely clear hit animations they had before. When you do manage to set up a melee attack, you're likely to be tackled by off-screen enemies before you can execute it. In addition to being really clingy, the villagers can also stun-lock the hell out of you, landing their attacks in unison with no invincibility frames to let you react, which is part of why these fights worked in the original. The old game made getting dropped into a swarm of enemies a lot of fun, but in this version it's just incredibly obnoxious and irritating. For some reason I found Mercenaries mode to be a lot more fun despite it being almost the same damn thing. It played so much better I was able to get an S+ on the first try. I think it's because the upgraded handgun restores stagger on every headshot, and that alone shifts the balance dramatically. Seeing how much better this plays, doling down the hit reactions in the main game was a giant mistake. The Catapult Gauntlet was the remake's low point for me. Ashley can no longer be told to wait and instead has to follow either closely or loosely, and there's not much difference between those options. She's plunging into danger with you either way. The catapults seem to fire more rapidly now, and I couldn't reach any cover before being hit. It was harder to find vantage points they could be destroyed from, and the sequence left me wondering how you're supposed to do this without taking damage. And because Ashley is always following, you can easily get caught in a stun loop, where you revive her just in time for another fireball to wipe you out. You could say that all of these sequences are faithful aside from a few small tweaks, which underscores the danger of remaking something so close to perfect already. Sometimes there's nowhere to go but down. I also had some minor gripes about the music and graphics. The original has a distinct look that stands out from the rest of the series. In this game, you'll be seeing a lot of the slimy, garbage-strewn basements Capcom has been using since RE7. I also recognized a lot of assets from both previous remakes. It's a gorgeous game with more color and style than the last few in the series. I do like the visuals a lot, but the fall spookiness is nerfed, and it often looks more like RE7 or 8 than it does 4. The music is also pretty forgettable in spite of the much higher production quality. Four had already moved into more minimalist territory, so it's not as much of an issue as it was for RE2, but some downgrades stand out. The Chopper Assault theme has an awkward bagpipe and orchestra rendition that doesn't fit the tone as well as the old MIDI version for me. You can use the original soundtrack, but it's once again behind a DLC paywall. It at least works much better here than it did in RE2's remake. It fits in seamlessly enough that you can forget it's not the default score. The tone of the story doesn't quite survive the update. Leon is no longer a wisecracking smartass, but a grizzled survivor with PTSD, and when he does try to quip, it comes off more weary than sassy. The bingo line is a good example of what I'm talking about.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
The levity is kind of undercut by a gory shot of a burning body. The realism has been boosted and the silly excess reined in, too much for the game to be funny.
When day breaks, you too will join our covenant.
Most characters, especially Krauser, seem like downgrades from the original.
You got John quick, as expected.
You can't save her. You can't save anyone.
The only bright spot here is Lewis, who's been given much more to do and has more time to grow on the player. He's almost a big enough upgrade to make up for the other characters being duds. The original wasn't Shakespeare or anything, but it had more fun with the goofy mess that it was, while this one tries to play the goofy mess more seriously. So, maybe unsurprisingly, this remake doesn't render one of the most acclaimed games ever obsolete. But most of the problems I had with it are specific to certain moments and are not game-wide issues. The crowd fights are few and far between. The majority of the time, when you have more space to maneuver, it does play better than the original.
Nice going, clumsy.
D-pad swapping eliminates the constant game pausing and makes some weapons more useful. For example, the Punisher is handier to keep when it can be quick-drawn as soon as the chance for penetrating shots arises. Afterward, you can switch back to a stronger handgun with a single tap. The slots are also doubled, making it easier to accommodate the huge arsenal Leon carries around. The knife parry is useful for getting out of some one-hit kill attacks, but unlike the counter mechanics in a lot of games, it isn't overused. You have to pay attention and stay aware of it in order to catch the prompts, so it feels like every parry is earned. It also enables the Krauser fight to take place entirely in-game, which I think is for the better. The Steam version has some nice control and UI options, like the choice of Xbox, PlayStation, or Nintendo button prompts. Every game should have this by now. There's also native gyro aim for DualSense users, but it is, unfortunately, terrible. It's so gummy and slow that it only responds to big movements, missing the point of what gyro is for. Developers keep making this harder for themselves than they have to. Just map it like a mouse and add a sensitivity slider. The good news is that for once, the game does not block mouse input when a gamepad is in use, so you can use Steam to set the gyro as a mouse without having to do anything fancy. There is camera judder when using the right stick and mouse together, so I created an action set for swapping to mouse joystick when aiming. This has nothing to do with RE4, but Steam Input's new UI sucks even harder than I feared it would. The deck set my expectations low, but on desktop it's even worse, with tons of bugs and problems getting configs to load and save. I bring it up to illustrate why it's important for developers to get native gyro support right, to save players from having to screw with external workarounds. The game plays incredibly well with mouse gyro, and it's a shame Capcom wasn't able to make this accessible to a wider audience. One last thing about the PC version is that it seems almost impossible to run with ray tracing on. This was an issue with the RTX updates of 2 and 3 also. Even when keeping below max VRAM usage, the game can't go more than 10 minutes without blowing up. Capcom's implementation seems broken, but with PC ports all deciding to be completely fucked lately, I guess the port is still above average if only one setting crashes your game. Aside from the controls, the inventory system has received a lot of simple enhancements that make it more enjoyable to use. You can mix any herb in your case without having to tap over to each one, although you can still use the drag and drop method if you want. When you run out of space, you can send weapons to storage at any time and retrieve them at typewriters, which function like item boxes now. There are unlockable attaché cases and charms with unique drop rate effects, letting you prioritize money, health, or ammo. Treasures don't require specific gems anymore, so the risk of missing a part and never being able to complete something is reduced. You just choose combos from your pool of gems, some yielding much higher bonuses than others. Spinels are no longer embedded in walls but are given as rewards for merchant missions. This opens up a secondary shop where you can make purchases without spending your upgrade money. The best item there is the upgrade ticket, which lets you attain the exclusive effect for a gun without maxing out its levels. Longtime players should be happy with how Capcom has modernized these classic systems while keeping their charms intact. Resident Evil 4 is not a remake the world needed, but I'm impressed with how it turned out, and think it's easily better than the remakes of 2 and 3. Some chapters are clearly improved by the remake, and there are quality of life enhancements to smooth out nearly every rough edge the old game had. The new side missions and expansions also make this a fuller game than the original, taking 23 hours to clear on my first run. But it feels different enough, and screws up enough, that it can't replace the original. And after completing it, I had no trouble jumping back into the old game. The new controls are the only hard thing to give up, but those come with obnoxious enemy behavior that ruins the flow of the action, so that advantage often cancels itself out. I'm left feeling that Capcom's effort would have been better spent elsewhere, like remaking Code Veronica, a game that stood to benefit a lot more from a remake, or better yet, making a new game. People are talking about whether 5 or 6 will get remakes next, and I can only see it as a colossal waste of dev time. Instead of trying to force some of the most mediocre entries into being good, I'd much rather see them build an all-new game with this modern, over-the-shoulder style. In my opinion, none of the recent remakes have topped the originals, and if all that effort had been spent on new games instead, we'd probably be past Resident Evil 10 by now, and who knows what kind of evolution the series could have had in that time. If you're perfectly happy with the original, you don't really have to buy this. The remake hasn't diminished its place in gaming history. It's still a high compliment to say that the remake rivals the original in quality, and it is a lot of fun to see alternate takes on the classic areas and bosses. It's worth getting as a remix version for those who have played the old game to death and want something new.
Not enough cash, stranger.
And hopefully it's the last stop on Capcom's nostalgia train before they return to actual new games. Except Dino Crisis. I forgot Dino Crisis. Put that in there.